founder and CEO of The Mighty. 7 years ago, I had the toughest day of my life. My wife and I went to her ultrasound appointment. She was 20 weeks pregnant. The doctor wouldn't look us in the eye, so we knew something wasn't quite right. He eventually told us that the baby boy that was coming along was missing an organ, a kidney, and there could be other complications. So this was obviously a big blow. We went home, and an hour later, we got a phone call from another doctor. Our 2-year-old daughter was really struggling at the time. She wasn't walking, she wasn't talking, she really wasn't even smiling. And we'd been looking for answers as to what was going on. He had the answer, but it wasn't the one we were looking for. He said she had a rare chromosome disorder. He'd never seen it before. He didn't even have a name for it. But what he did tell us was that he thought it was unlikely that her mind would ever develop beyond that of a 5-year-old. These pieces of news were not easy to take all within a couple hours of each other. I went looking on the web. At that point, we felt lost, we felt scared, we felt alone. And what I found was very little information about this. Eventually, I found a research study. I wanted to open it, see what was there. It was in Italian, so it didn't really help me that much. But eventually, I did find an old newsletter from years ago that had stories from 6 parents who had raised children with this condition that my daughter had. And that was the moment I truly understood the power of storytelling, because these just resonated with me in a huge way. Now, I was a journalist. I had worked at ABC News, NBC News, the New York Times. I thought I knew everything about storytelling, but I didn't quite understand the power because I'd never identified with the story the way I did with these. These parents, I just wanted to reach out and connect with them. To be honest, I didn't like a lot of what they were saying in their stories because they were talking about, dozens of seizures a day and autism and all sorts of other issues that some of these kids face. But it was the honesty and the vulnerability, and there was some strength and joy in what they were saying too. I just figured if these parents could handle this, my wife and I could too. So fast forward 7 years. I don't take a lot of selfies, but this is my daughter Annabelle and me at the most recent daddy-daughter dance. Now, she does have a lot of challenges, but she's a happy kid. And our son has one kidney, but otherwise he's fine. We also have another son as well now. What my wife and I experienced through all of this was we figured out what helped us more than anything else was connecting with other parents with kids with special needs. That's where we learned the most from. Now, I want to show you guys how we're doing this. We created The Mighty really to empower people facing disabilities, diseases, chronic illnesses, mental illnesses. That's our purpose. We started this company a little more than a year and a half ago, bootstrapping it. We raised a seed round. We have 15 employees now, and it's working. More than 20% of American adults have read a story on The Mighty in the year and a half we've been around. And I want to show you how it works. So I want you all to pretend just for a moment that everyone in this room has fibromyalgia, all right? There's 5 million Americans with this. Pretend that you got diagnosed a year or 2 ago, so you've been living with this for a while. I want to show you just a snippet of 2 different stories, and you guys can tell me which ones you think will help you more, all right? Here's the first one. And here's the second. Now, how many out there, raise your hands if the story you want to read, the one you think is going to help you more, is the first one. Now, raise your hands if you think it's the second. Thank you. Smart crowd. What you've just demonstrated is that this story is helping people far more than these other companies that are worth billions of dollars. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about these 2 stories. That first one is only 4 paragraphs long. There are no comments. There are no photos. There's no way to engage with it. It's essentially a dead end. The one on the right was written by this woman, Danielle Myers, one of our contributors. She includes 18 photos, intimate details about what living with fibromyalgia is. 32 paragraphs filled with insight around pain, around injections, around doctor visits. But she also talks about parenting and her marriage and what her definition of unconditional love is. This story had over 5 minutes was spent, on average, just reading it on your phone. And what's remarkable about it for me is that it led it into a discussion of more than 20 people that were living with fibromyalgia at the bottom of the story, all engaging with it. That's really how we build community, is through stories. It's if all of you people who raised your hand saying that this was a story you wanted to read, if 20 of you went off to the side and all started talking together, that's community. Now we're doing this across hundreds of conditions. Just on chronic illness alone, of the top 10 most shared stories anywhere on the web in the last year, 5 of those top 10 come from the mighty. This is how we're building community. I want to talk to you about the business model a little bit. Quality content at scale. Now, I've been working digital media for a long time. I started in editorial, but I've worked across tech and product and sales and all the other aspects as well. This is a model that I think can really work, not just for the mighty, to be honest, but for other digital media companies as well. You start at the top. There are 2 kinds of stories on the internet. One are throwaway stories, right? You probably read some on your phone already today. If you don't remember what you read, it was a throwaway story. The other bucket is the takeaway stories. This is the gold of the internet, right? These are the ones that kind of light up your mind, right? That pull at your heart, that change you maybe in some small way. That's where you really want to start if you're going to try to build a big company. Moving over to the right, let's talk a little bit about how expensive it can be to build those takeaway stories. When I was at the New York Times, there was a $200 million newsroom budget, right? That's not scalable. At the Mighty, we have 7 editors. We have over 2,000 contributors now that are all unpaid, but they're getting tremendous value on being part of this platform. We're adding 50 contributors a week. This is scalable. Now down to the bottom, this is a massive underserved market. There are more than 100 million Americans living with a chronic illness, with a disease, with a disability. The truth is, though, this isn't an American problem, it's a global one. There are billions of people out there. The internet is supposed to connect us all, but there's a lot of folks out there who are just feeling alone with whatever personal issue or illness that they're dealing with. Now, of all the different verticals and content, the one with the highest advertising rate is health, and it's by a huge margin. $11 billion will be spent in the next 5 years just on pharma and healthcare companies alone in digital advertising. And the truth is, though, if we can build this into a big community, there's far more ways to, far more revenue streams that we can add outside of advertising. There are clinical trials, right? There are events. There's so much more we can do. It's a huge opportunity. Last point on this, our purpose is really to serve this community. So as we grow, we're going to put a lot more money back into the nonprofits that we're working with. That's a big part of our purpose and who we are. This just shows that it's working. When we got started early on, it was a 2-person operation. It was hard to get people to contribute stories. Right now, so far this month, most days have been between 75 and 100 stories coming in from people who want to be part of this. Now, let's talk about how we want to scale this. The number one thing is the platform itself, right? The idea of a platform, for us at least, and the network effects that we want to see, it empowers people to help other people, right? That's the point of it all. So we just started with our first release was making it far easier for people to submit stories, and that's what's led to a big increase in submissions. But beyond that, if you think about what LinkedIn has done in business or what Nextdoor is doing with neighborhoods, that's the kind of thing that we want to do in health. The second part, community. And we work with hundreds of nonprofits. We're helping them drive awareness, and they're helping us with distribution. But beyond that, there's a lot of offline things. We just heard recently from a school district in Wisconsin. They wanted to know if they could print out all of the stories we've done around kids with special needs and somehow package them in a way they could get them to the therapists in the school district. They could get them to their teachers. They could get them to the parents. And we got to figure out how to do this with them. But if we can do it with them, we can do it with every school district in the country. That's how we're thinking about it. Another big initiative this year for us is we're linking all of our contributors who write about rare disease with medical schools around the country. Right? You can't expect a doctor to know 7,000 rare diseases, but if they hear from someone who's actually gone through getting some kind of diagnosis, that may help them with a patient and figuring out how to get a diagnosis for them. There's a lot of offline things we're trying to do like that. The last part on this, how do we scale this woman named Sarah? Right? So what we really want to do is scale her role. Sarah came to us as a contributor around mental health. And then we eventually brought her on full-time to run the mental health community. If you think of the old school term, you may have heard of a beat journalist, right? That was the idea that you could really oversee a topic, become an expert in it. And we created a kind of role like that. We call Sarah our guinea pig because we didn't know how exactly this would work. She spends a third of her time writing stories, but it's only a third. The other 2/3 are spent differently. The second third is really spent recruiting contributors to tell their own stories. And the last third is spent really working with the community. Forming partnerships with other nonprofits or other companies that are out there doing something with mental health. And they help us with the distribution side. Using that technique, she's been able to grow an audience, her alone, to 2.3 million visits a month just on mental health. One idea is to scale this through adding hundreds of Sarahs across all these different conditions. So why does someone join the Mighty? I love the second part of this email that we got. It's like you created this giant club for all of us who knew we had something to say, and you made it safe for us to say it. That really resonates. We've heard this time and time again in different ways, not articulated always this well from community members. We are building a brand that really means something to people. They want to be part of it. We hear time and time again from contributors how therapeutic this is for them to write on the platform and connect with others. This is a bulletin board that we have up in our office. It's a reminder to us why we do what we do in building this community. And it's also a reminder to us that unlike a lot of health sites that are really about conditions, we're about people. Our best stories reach far beyond the community that they really came out of. In this case, this story was read by millions of people within just a few weeks of it being published on our site. The writer of this is the guy on the far right that you see. And within a few days of publishing this story on our site, he was on national television shows talking about this letter that he wrote. I want to show you one of my favorite comments that we have gotten since we started here. This tells me that this is a takeaway story. What I love about this is I'm guessing that this person was not really part of the Down syndrome community. But I bet this person will think about Down syndrome in a very different way now after reading this story. I just want to show you 4 numbers that I think are meaningful to our business. This first one, 6,000. We've created 6,000 stories, published 6,000 stories since we started the Mighty. This is a tiny number, right? There are millions of personal experiences that people have out there that we want to have on our platform that can help other people. But we've only produced 6,000, and yet those 6,000 stories have been read 100 million times since we got started. Whoops. I'll just go straight to 0. So this is not a number that I was sure that I should show a big group of investors and venture capitalists. But I have to tell you, I'm really proud of this number because it represents all of the money we've spent last year and this year on paid acquisition. Those 100 million people that are reading our stories, we haven't paid for any of them to come onto our site. It's all organic. That traffic has been coming from building community of our readers, our writers, nonprofits, hospitals, media companies that we partner with. That's how we've gotten these 100 million people to the site. And the last story. This is the takeaway story. You can forget everything that I've said, but I want you to remember the number 20. Jean Abbott wrote a story for us last year. She submitted this story about living with cerebral palsy for more than 30 years, or so she thought. She went to a new doctor who kind of questioned that diagnosis for her. She sent her home with a pill. Jean took the pill and within 24 hours stood up unassisted for the first time in decades. Within 2 months, she went on a 10-mile hike. Her symptoms had essentially gone away. She didn't have cerebral palsy. She had a form of dystonia, a neurological condition. When she sent this in, we thought it was remarkable. We got her story out in a big way. She was on the Today Show, and when she's now a speaker, has her own book and all of that. She sent me an email over the holidays. She told me that since publishing that story on our site, she has heard from 20 people who thought they had cerebral palsy too. But they went back and they checked because they saw her story. And they went into the doctor's offices, and it turns out they had the same thing Jean had. Jean's story literally changed the lives of 20 people. That's the power of storytelling. That's the strength of communities. And I think that's the future of digital health. Thank you.